My name's Nathan, right? I was in a housing co-op for like 12, 13 years or something, and then I realised it's 20 years ago this year that I started actually professionally supporting groups, which was all an accident. It was just I was far too busy helping people, and somebody said you should apply for this job doing that. So I've worked with probably about 30 or so housing co-ops and community land trusts over the years, some of them existing who are doing development, some of them startups who never ever got anywhere, and some of them who went on to do great stuff. My co-op culture is a bunch of people who started off in co-ops and then have ended up helping people in co-ops. And one of our members, Andy, does a lot of work around finance for co-ops, and somehow a message got through, and he said, like, you're on the South Coast, can you go and do this financial literacy training with these people in Brighton? I went, okay, and then it's not financial literacy training at all, it's financial planning. So I just had to like go, oh, okay, let's reinvent this. One thing I'll say, I've put up a link here. This is a cooperative link, s.coop. If you ever want to put a tiny link to anything, s.coop is your co-op version. s.coop/240218, today's date, and you can get all these slides. I also have printed off 10 or 11, which was enough for one for each group, because I thought, I didn't know how many people were turning up, and I hate wasting paper. But so if you can sort of pass those around and keep one per group, you can do what you like with them, but you can download them and share them. The idea, there's a lot of slides here, given we've only got 30 minutes, but the idea is it's a resource that you can use within your groups to actually help explain stuff. And that's me, and then you'll have my contact details there if for some bizarre reason you need to actually speak to me. So this is what I was asked to cover in 30 minutes, which actually you could spend half a day doing and probably walk away going, oh, I think we covered that. So whistle stop tour. Why community-led housing groups need financial plans. So basically, I'm here to back up the work that the Brighton Hove Community Land Trust project is doing to help you realise how important it is that you actually get to grips with your finances, right? What is financial planning? So like a real introduction. Unfortunately, we haven't got time to like go through line by line how to do it, because that would be at least 3 hours, if not 6 hours or so. We'll have a look at a couple of different financial planning tools that you might consider using, and there's links as well for you to download those, and they're ones that groups are using actively. And we're kind of going to cover the range of types of projects and the types of financial plans you need to have. That's going to be the very last thing, where broadly I will say you're all different, you're all complicated in your own ways, and basically, how complicated your plan is going to depend on how complicated your group is and what you're trying to achieve. So that's me quickly sidestepping answering that one in detail. And then what does it actually mean if a project is financially viable? Because I think this is a term that gets bandied about, and we just wanted to sort of check in and go, what do we actually mean by this? So yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to talk to these slides, because otherwise I would miss something out, because I'm on this sort of roller coaster. So why do you need financial plans? Right, okay, the viability is the first thing. The big question is, will it work? And I've worked with lots of groups before who went through all this soul-searching stuff, meeting as groups for weeks and weeks and months on end, and working out all this fine detail about how they were going to live together, and all the ground rules for the shared spaces, and down to the washing up rota. And then when it came down to it, they realised they couldn't actually afford the place they wanted. So they'd wasted all that time. So it's really important to get this out of the way early on. At least start to get a feel for like, what can we afford? And it's really interesting that we've obviously got some groups who've got no equity whatsoever. Although if you've managed to get loan stock and grants, brilliant, well done. Some of you have no idea what you've got, and some of you have a vague idea of how much equity you have access to. Getting to grips with that sort of stuff is really important for you to understand whether or not it will work. But also, that everyone focuses on the capital element. Getting enough money to buy the buildings, but you have to think about the running costs as well, which even if you're a co-housing project where everybody owns a bit of the development through whatever mechanism you choose, you're still going to have some collective stuff that happens and has to be paid for somehow. So thinking about that stuff, you have to get that stuff worked out. Credibility. If you've got some sort of financial plan, if you can show people numbers, it shows that as a group you've actually been able to achieve something, rather than sitting in the pub going, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could? And and I've got a friend who I used to live in a housing co-op with, and every time I go out for a drink with him, he's going, let's all sell our houses and buy a big place in the countryside, and it's going to be this big community. And I'm always like going, yeah, but I don't actually believe you want to do that. I think it's just because you've had 3 pints of cider. And, once you wake up tomorrow, you're going to go, I don't want to do this. So actually, if you get as far as saying, we've done the numbers, and this is how it's going to work, and this is how much Nathan's putting in, this is how much Noel's putting in, and this is how much Jenny's putting in, and we've worked out how it's going to work, it actually demonstrates that as a group, you can achieve something. Right, so actually that's one of the difficulties for a lot of community-led housing groups is actually the conversations with people who have money, whose money you need to get access to. And one of the best ways of convincing them that you're serious is actually presenting them with numbers. So this is like the sales pitch for why you should actually get on with this piece of work early on, rather than waiting till you're further down the road. It's a really important way of provoking important discussions within your group. So quite often, especially where we're talking about groups who've got equity, I mean, at least 2 groups said, we know we've got equity, but we kind of haven't assessed it yet. And it might be because you're all sat around going, I'm sitting on your hands, I don't really want to say how much money I've got in my house, and I've worked really hard to pay that off, and I don't know how much they've got. And people feel nervous about talking about money. Well, we start identifying what the variable numbers are that we have access to in terms of capital and in terms of like what income streams are going to be. So, for instance, with the co-op that's based on renting, bunker, it's like actually who can afford what. Actually how much rent can people afford? It's really important discussions. You can provoke those discussions early on, because there are some people who might have a line in the sand and they'll go like, that's it. You go beyond that, I'm walking away. So it's a really good way of provoking those discussions. It might be about, sometimes it can mean redesigning what you're going to do so that it actually meets more of your members' needs. So actually, it's when you look at the financial plans, you totally change. So a group I was working with, they were looking at trying to get a house, and it's a group of students. I'm using some of their early numbers in this presentation, but they were going to get this house. 5 of them were going to live in it. They're going to pay £75 each a month rent, which is nothing, but they were very far north. When we did the work, we realised they couldn't do it on that basis. And I said, well, what are you going to do? You're going to go up to 85 quid? And they went, no, we're going to turn the living room into a bedroom so we can have one extra person in. But you can't have that discussion until you know what the numbers are doing. So you really have to sort of get on with it. Helps you identify the size of the financial gap. So your development's going to cost 8 million. You've got access to 1 million, you think, you hope. You're not sure when, but so you've got a 7 million gap. Brilliant. So now you know what the job is. The job is to find 7 million quid. Easy. No, seriously, knowing how much money you need and being able to demonstrate that is actually the way to unlock money. Money is out there. People are falling over themselves to lend you money. May not be good terms, but they're falling over themselves. And seriously, there's lots of money out there, especially when you're looking at the sort of like cooperative sector, the social sector. There are a lot of people who are very interested in putting money into things which are socially useful and purposeful. And there's like a whole, generations of people who are unlocking equity. And they're not just putting it into their co-housing things, they're investing it in stuff through community shares and things like that. So actually being able to say this is how much money we need is the first step to getting the money. So that's why you've got to do your financial planning. Helps with critical success factors, so what has to happen or else this fails. And it helps you with getting your priorities together. So basically you look at the numbers and what do the numbers mean in terms of my life, my real life. Does this mean I've got to be a member for 5 years before there's a house for me to move into? And am I happy spending 5 years living in the crummy rented accommodation I'm in now before this house is ready for me? Yeah, it's just like you have to have those honest conversations, yeah? And the numbers always focus them, right? They make them real. And yet, what support you need, and also the most important thing of all, this is the most important thing. Understanding, member understanding, right? I mean, we're talking community-led housing. I always work on the basis of membership, right? People who live there are going to be members. So I will keep saying member. Just accept that means whoever's supporting you in whatever way. But people understanding exactly what it is they're involved in. So it's not just about satisfying the people you might be trying to get money off. The banks, the lenders, the whoever's. It's actually about your own members understanding what it is they're getting into. So that's why it's really important. Oh dear, I'm already behind time. So what does financially viable mean? Broadly, you're going to make enough surplus or profit to cover your costs. That's the simplest way I can put this, right? You look at your income, you look at your outgoings. For those of you who are in a rental situation, it's like looking at all the costs you're going to have of providing that housing, which is probably going to be mortgage payments, loan stock, interest payments, putting aside money for repaying the loan stock when it's due, all the things associated with like being a landlord. All those things, you've got to add all those things up, and then how much rent you're going to come in. Is the amount of rent greater than the amount of outgoings? Right, so it's simple. You have to go away, do the research. Write it down. It really is that simple. For those of you on a sort of equity base, are there going to be ongoing costs which the either leaseholders or owners on the covenanted land have to meet somehow? And how are you going to meet that? So are we talking service charges? And if so, how much is it per year, per month, per whatever? And is that enough to actually cover those costs? And have you thought about all those things which you forgot happen? There's the big costs that people always remember, but the small costs that happen on a weekly basis and on a daily basis that are so frequent but so small, it might only cost £1 a day, but that's sort of like 360 quid at the end of the year. And if you forget about it, you've got a 360 quid size hole. So can you pay the cost of your finance? Can you cover borrowing that money? And I think the other thing that's really important, if it's viable, it means that the people that you want, your members who want to live in this thing, that it's actually worthwhile. That actually they're getting a better deal than they would if they went elsewhere. Because as much as many of us may be politically motivated to be involved in co-housing or cooperatives or community land trusts, whatever, but actually at the end of the day, we should be offering member benefit that's better than the market. Right? That's the whole reason we're doing this. Better quality, more affordable housing. So actually, it has to be competitive to be viable, because otherwise you'll find you'll have members leaving. When times get hard, then people will say, I really love this, but actually I've got to leave because I can't afford anymore to be in this situation. So this is about viability, is about can we keep hold of our members because we're offering something far better. And in theory, it's about we can access enough of the right money at the right time. But actually, you know what? In theory is feasibility. Viability is actually practically. We know where it's coming from. We can name where this money is coming from. Okay, right. So financial planning. What is it? Way to test our ideas. Way to test commitment. So look, I think there's two aspects to financial planning, right? There's the simple bit, the simple calculations, what I always call the back of the fag packet. And then there's your projections, right? Which is the stuff where you need computers in front of you because you're going to be working on spreadsheets. So the ballpark outline, literally, this is the sort of thing you can sit there with somebody and say, this is how it's going to work. So, we're going to have 10 people, paying 500 quid a month rent. So that's £5,000 income a month we know we got. That sort of thing. Literally being able to sketch it out. So you can do the very simple maths. What's our income going to be over the year in rough terms, and what's our outgoings in rough terms? Really, really simple stuff. Because people get simple stuff. You get simple stuff. Not everybody's financially literate enough to be able to read spreadsheets. So actually, I think you need to do the simple stuff first. And that's one of the things, if you can come away from today, at least having got there, or if you're already there, you'll be going beyond there. Being able to sketch out in simple terms the global picture, the ballpark figures. I think that's one of the really important bits. You might find you don't know the answer. Not a problem. You've then got an action, and we need to go away and research this thing. We need to find this out. We might need to have a meeting with our members because we don't know how much equity we've really got access to. So we've got to have that awkward discussion. Yeah, I'm looking at you, sir, because you were one of the ones that said, we've got equity, just no idea how much, awkward time, Actually, are you committed to this, and how much are you able to or willing to commit to this? So just the ballpark figures. Okay, so one of the things is the investment requirement. I think this is a really big thing that all of you are going to have to identify. I've already talked about the really simple example. Got 1 million quid available. We know it's going to cost 8 million. £7 million investment requirement. Okay, said simply, but what are the things that you need in order to get you to the first day of any income coming in, or if you're working on a sort of co-housing, shared housing where you're all buying into it, on the first day of people moving in, and certainly how much is a site going to cost? If you haven't already identified it, can you get an idea of the rough cost that you're expecting to pay? And, does that give you some flexibility, like ballpark figures, if it's between this amount and that amount? Or if you're buying a property, do you have an indicative amount or do you have an actual property? You can go and say it's going to cost this much. And then what about, if you're buying land and building, how much is your development going to cost? Have you researched that yet? Is it just theory, or have you actually got somebody to give you some sort of price? And being in this room with all these other groups gives you an opportunity to actually speak to other people who may have been further down the road. So by the end of the day, hopefully you'll be swapping numbers and going, mate, can I call you sometime to find out how much it cost you? So you've got an opportunity to learn from each other about things. Or if it's refurbing a building, so buying the big building and refurbing it into flats that one of the groups with no name said you might be doing. How much is the refurb going to cost? Because I've done this work, with community pubs as well, and they're going, yeah, we're going to buy this pub and we're going to refurbish it. And go, how much does the refurb cost? Again, we don't know. I said, well, how do you know how much money you need in order to buy this thing? So the same applies to housing. You need to know what's your total amount of money that you need to raise to be able to get to the stage where everyone's moved in. And then there's the other issue of how do you release the equity in order that you can get this place sorted, and what happens to the people once they've released the equity? So actually, do you need to have some system where you've got some sort of like bridging finance, where you say this is the money that's in place until everyone sells their house, because they can't move out of their house until we've finished the development. So coming up with those sorts of numbers, these are the challenges to you. I'm not going to give you a magic wand. There's no download button. There's nothing you can press and go, here's the answer. It's work. You've got to do research. You'll sit down and discuss these things, work your way through it. All those things like surveys, if you need architect's fees, stamp duty, land tax, unless you happen to be a charitable community land trust, in which case you might not have to pay it. All those things, you've got to research them, know them, understand them. That's the way you do financial planning, is actually get to know your numbers. Am I correct, Peter? And just what's the big number? How much do you need, and when do you need it? Because you may not actually need it all at once. It may be a case you say, we need a big chunk of money now, and then in 2 years' time, we're going to need another chunk of money, because that's the next stage of the development. And how are you going to get that money? And I'm just going to, I'm just going to zip forward to this. Here's an example. This is from Leeds Community Homes. They're an actual community land trust that actually did. They purchased 16 homes, I think it was, 9 of which were going to be affordable rent. So the idea was, buy 16 homes, sell seven of them on at a profit to make enough money to help refurb the ones that they were keeping. But we haven't got time to actually go into the detail, but it's on the slides. This was lifted from their community share offer document, right? So this is real live stuff. This actually came out of their document, and you can see they've said this is what we need. Purchase price of these homes, legal costs to do with drawing up leases and the purchase itself, stamp duty, marketing the properties for resale, for rental, council tax, things like everything that they would need to actually get paid for. And then they come up with a global figure. I say this is how much money we've got to meet. So what would be really nice would be if for your project you could come up with something with a list of headings and say, this is the figure. And as I say, what you might have is you might have it in stages. You might have like, this is like, next May, and then this is next December, we need another chunk of money. So that sort of thing. If you can make it simple like this, rather than presenting people with a spreadsheet, which I've printed off a couple here. I think there's about 15, because I wasn't sure how many were coming, so please share. But we've got 2 spreadsheets here, which I'm going to speak to in a second. But they're complicated things. This is simple. Most people will be able to look at that and get what you're talking about.
Is that for Hove?
No, that was for a total development.
There's no ongoing costs there.
Sorry?
No ongoing.
No, this was just the investment requirement. The ongoing costs is rent, covering the outgoings. So this is literally how much money capital do you need right at the very start. So there's what we got there is we got a year broken down into months, and then there's 2 that are 40 years worth of payments. And this is based on another co-op I work with.
I think we're marking at the prices of the 1970 price.
No, this is Leeds prices. It is still the 1970s in Leeds. In fact, Brighton and Hove, I think it's probably the most expensive place outside London to live, from what I know of.
Who were they buying the homes at?
I can't remember now, but I think it's He might well have been a council, actually. But anyway, the idea isn't, it's not the numbers, right? It's the concept. Yeah, it's the concept that you can actually break. Yeah, you're good. We want one of them. Yeah. Yeah. Download, quick. No, yeah. It's the concept, right? Break it down into budget headings and chunks, so you've got a global figure, and then you know what you're aiming for, right? And then the question is, what's it made up of? So I'm going to go back to the slide before, which is different forms of finance. What are they? Grants? You know. I'm amazed there's still some around. I mean, back when I was sort of first involved with the housing co-ops, we used to get like 100% grant in some cases. And then it went to 40%. And then it got so much hassle, we didn't bother. Loan stock, where you raise money from people who support what you do, but you don't necessarily give them membership and voting rights. You know, fixed loan with a fixed repayment. Mortgages, yep. Problem with mortgages, I think Ecology Building Society at 80% is probably the best loan to value ratio I've seen for a co-op, right? Most will be more like 70%, right? So you've got to raise 30% of the value. If you're doing a development, mortgages for developments, I mean, I've not done one recently, but the last time I was looking into this, it was kind of like you can get a mortgage for 50% of the value until you've completed or got halfway through, and then they'll give you the rest of the money because they're borrowing against the value, right? So basically what they're doing is they're saying, we'll lend you the value of the land, but we ain't lending you any more till you at least got halfway through building what's going to go on the land, then we'll lend you some more. Again, you need to do the research. So you need to have a look around at lenders. Who's offering what rates? How much do you need to raise in terms of a deposit? And like I say, especially if you're dealing with if you're dealing with buying land and then building on the land, you know, the complexities of actually borrowing when you're not, because mortgage, they basically work on the basis that you're borrowing money against something which is worth more than the amount of money you're borrowing, because in 1 year's time, it will be worth more than it was when you bought it. So they will happily lend, because you've already put 20% down at least. So worst case scenario, they keep that 20% value when they sell the house, when they repossess it off you. Because they're lovely people, mortgage providers. They're working in your best interests. No, they're not. They're working in the interests of their shareholders, even ethical banks. So actually, you know, you need to look into who's offering what deal, and that might affect the amount of money you need to raise from different sources. So actually, if you can't get enough mortgage, where are you going to get the gap? You know, I said earlier about the gap. So if you know you can get 80% mortgage, you've got a 20% gap. Great. We had bunker example. Yeah. 225 mortgage and the rest loan stock and grants. Great, you've done this. You've identified which. Then there's equity, which of course could be community shares, which is raising money from the community who are actually members of your community organisation, and they have a vote and they get paid interest, which is a form of investment equity, or there's equity in terms of the housing term of equity, which means people are actually buying a particular property. So you've got to work out how much money is coming and what form it's taking, because these are all the different ways of you bridging that gap, which is that total investment, how much we need to start to get to day one. Where's it coming from? I mean, you can even experiment with this thing called deferred payment. Did it once about 12 years ago with a co-op in Bristol, because they were buying off the council. And the thing about finance for housing is at the very start, you've got this huge, massive chunk of money you've got to get, but you've got no income if you're in the rental sector. But then you find out over time, because your rents tend to go up with inflation, but your costs are staying fairly static in real terms because mortgages stay pretty much the same level all the way through, actually you're making more and more profit. So you find out these co-ops are like, they get to year 12 or 15 and they're just sat on hundreds of thousands of pounds, whereas they were struggling to actually survive in the first couple of years. And we managed to put it to Bristol City Council that they would take half payment at the start and half payment 10 years in, which was amazing because immediately that just eased the amount of finance they needed. There's not a great ending to the story. They're still there, but somebody contacted me and said, you worked with them, didn't you? And it's like, yeah, they got to this stage where they suddenly need a load of money to pay Bristol City Council. You know, and of course I looked, and what had happened is since I'd stopped working with them, someone else had played with the spreadsheets, you know, and whereas before it showed very clearly that they were building up a nice big surplus and they were actually going to have this money sat in their bank account, they decided not to put rents up, and they just kept bouncing along with zero. I mean, it's fine because they could just remortgage the property, but if you're going to go for some sort of deferred payment, you'd probably have a bit of a headache with your mortgage provider because they're going to be going, well, hang on, who actually owns this thing? Yeah, but it is an option that some groups have used to try and actually leverage the property. And the main finance that tends to be used by community housing groups is actually reinvested surpluses. But if you're a start-up, you don't have them. Yeah, but I mean, most of the existing co-ops, housing co-ops in this country, if they go and do a development, like one group I work with, they were able to get hold of a house fairly cheap, and the refurb, so they got a mortgage on the house, and the refurb costs all came out of their reserves because they've been running for 25 years and they've been building up these reserves for the future. But obviously, if you're at a startup stage, reinvested surpluses are not an option. But we heard from one group, and I forget which one it was, but the fact that you've already got some equity in one of your existing houses. Was it South Downs Eco? Yeah, Selby. So actually, that effectively, you've got some reserves or whatever. You've got some money that you might be able to access. Oh dear, where am I going? This is a whistle-stop tour. I really don't want to confuse anyone, right? I'm trying to keep this simple, but we do have okay, variables. I talked about variables, right? There are things which can go up and things which can go down. And when it comes to financial planning, working out what's your upper limit and what's your lower limit is really important for you as a community-led group. It's not just one person sitting in an office, a developer with a big stash of money in the bank. You're a community of people who are all contributing to this in different ways. So you need to actually have these conversations. So looking at the numbers, maximum and minimum. So the sorts of things like how many people you've got, could that number go up and down? Is there a way of changing what you're going to do? If you actually take double the people on, does it make your development easier or more difficult? Sometimes it actually makes things easier because there's a sort of like profitability. There's less per person. Sometimes it makes it more expensive because actually when you buy a bigger property or a bigger chunk of land, you get higher stamp duty. So actually it can be counterintuitive. So you have to test this stuff out. How many people have you got in your group and who wants to be involved? What's your tenure? I mean, how if it's rents, how many rents have you got? If it's people who've got leasehold or who are purchasing on a development that's sort of like on a leasehold basis off of a community land trust or with a covenant on it, how many of these people are there with different tenures? Because some groups you'll have a mix. For some of you, you'll be one form of tenure, which is really simple because there's one set of calculations, so it's really easy. For others of you, you might be mixing and matching and saying, well, we got 2 houses which are going to be rented, we've got 2 which are going to be bought outright, but we're going to have a covenant on the land. So if they're sold on in the future, they can only be sold on at an affordable level because that's why we're doing this. And we're going to have some people on a leasehold basis who are doing a part sort of ownership thing where they're doing that sort of stepped purchase thing. So actually, what are you dealing with? Then you can start looking at how it's going to work. And what's your income? So this is your point about ongoing costs, right? Where's your money coming from? Is it from rents? In which case, what's an affordable rent? So the group, I was working with a group of students and they're saying it's got to be 75 quid. And then I looked at their business plan and they said that the cheapest other accommodation for students in their area was 105 quid. And I was sort of saying, well, you could go up to 85 and still be cheaper, but they just, no, there's a line in the sand, we're not doing this. I said, well, it's up to you, but the property you're looking at won't work. So, it's a way of testing the numbers. So what's your wiggle room? How far are people to go? People willing to go before they're going to walk away? Because that's really important. If you've got a group of people who've been working hard at trying to pull this together for 2 years, and then all of a sudden you say, we're going to go up to this rent level, and I say, well, that's it, I'm out, I can't afford that, I don't earn enough. You have to have these conversations fairly early, I think, to know where your upper limits are, and it might be a case of redesigning the way you do your development so that it fits the needs of your members. I prefer that to we've decided we're going to do something and half our members can't afford it, so off you go. It's not the way we're supposed to do these things. So try and work out what our members can afford. And then, all this expenditure. So if you can start writing down what's your type of expenditure, what are the things you're going to have to be paying out for. So there's the development side of things, but also the ongoing stuff, like running your office. If you're running a community space, you've got a shared room. What's going to happen about heat and light? What's going to happen about maintenance on that? You know, so even if it is a case of everybody's just purchasing their own property, but you've got shared stuff. How does the shared stuff get paid for? What does the shared stuff cost you? So really it is, you know, there's no easy answer. It is a case, just start listing it out. If you can get a list of the different things you need to get costings for and then send members of your group off to work them out, that's one really great way you can involve everybody in financial planning, because as soon as you understand something, you take ownership of it. So if you can get people involved in your group involved, if you've got a list of the things you need to find out how much they're going to cost, or at least estimate them, you can get different members of your group to take responsibility for working them out. Then all of a sudden people begin to take a bit of ownership. So when you look at the big spreadsheet, which is like this horrible thing that I was sent around, that's a simple example, by the way. When you get to the line that somebody's researched, they go, I understand this bit. This is the bit I did. So actually, it sort of almost creates an opportunity for everybody to take a bit of ownership and develop understanding. Whereas if you get one person who's had to do all the work, and they've done all the research, people just accept the numbers and go, well, we believe you, you know, yeah, whatever you say. And then when it doesn't look right, they come back and go, so what do I do about this? You know, I could see you nodding your head, Helen, so I know you've been there. Yeah, time as well. What are your time scales? So how long is this stuff happening? So actually you'll see when you get your cash flow, yeah, it's like we've got all these budget headings, but when do they happen? Yeah? So, and this is not easy to do stood in front of a room, which is why I gave you a handout of an example, which is just to look at. It's not to use as a reference tool. It's just an example, so don't base anything on that. But you know, when do these things happen? When do you have to make this big payment back to all the people who borrowed loan, who lent you loan stock money? You know, when does the grant money come in? No, the grant money comes in 3 months after we've built or we've purchased. How are we going to survive the 3 months till that grant money comes in? So starting to plot on a calendar, on a sort of like month by month or even week by week basis at the start. When does the money drop in? When does the money go out? Do you have things which come out once a year? Do you have things which come out every month? And one of the big problems I see sometimes is people just say, oh, well, it costs this much over the year. We'll spread that over 12 months. And the cash flow looks all lovely and nice, except what's actually happened is all those things come out in the first year of the month and you've got negative cash flow because you can't afford it. So you need to start thinking it's not just how much per year or once in a lifetime of your property or your development, it's also when. When does this stuff happen? If you can sketch that stuff out, you can start to put that into a cash flow projection of some kind. So yeah, what is a cash flow forecast? All the money coming in, all the money going out, and when it happens. I'm not going to labour the point there, but put a spreadsheet together. You can use there's a couple of tools you can use, which I'm going to flag up in a second, or just make your own. You know, pay special attention to investment repayments. Right, that I just gave you the story about the people. That wasn't an investment repayment. That was actually a payment. But don't forget about the things which is going to happen in years and years' time, because what happens if in 5 years' time, you move on and out of your development and you're the one who did all the numbers. And everyone else is just happy that, you know, this is wonderful, everything's running fine, but there's nobody keeping an eye on our finances knowing that at year 10 you've got this horrible repayment you've got to make because you borrowed all this loan stock. You used other people's money. And this is the thing about using other people's money. If you're using other people's money, you have to give it back to them at some point. So, you know, work out when that is and make sure everybody in the co-op understands that. You know, it's almost like you want to have a warning light going off or something. You know, that's on the handout thing. You know, just make sure that you consider that things go up in price with inflation, and also you might want to put up your income. You know. It's not unreasonable, even in affordable co-op housing, for the rent to go up a little bit every now and then, because that's actually one of the ways that you make yourself sustainable and hopefully in a position to be able to leverage more finance to build some more properties or buy some more properties so that more people can benefit from what your co-op's trying to do. So actually think about that sort of stuff. And then cyclical maintenance. This is boring. Yeah, once every 4 years we've got to do the fascia boards, and once every 25 years we think we're going to have to replace a roof. You know. Yeah, it's boring, but it's essential, because if you ain't got a roof that that works, then you're going to have all that damage when you find out that it's leaking. So you have to think about long term. So that's why when we're talking housing, you talk 25, 40 years really. You need to have this long view. So what's the point of the cash flow? Is it a case of basically we've worked out this is all fine. If we put this magic number in at the start, we don't go into negative cash flow, it all works. I've seen that far too many times. People think it's about making the spreadsheet work. It's not about making the spreadsheet work, it's about making real life work. It should be a reflection of real life. Dropping 50 grand of grants that you don't, sorry, I'm not picking on you. It's just a number I thought of, but saying we're going to have 50 grand's worth of grants when you haven't identified them may make the spreadsheet work, but in real life it does absolutely nothing for you. So actually, test it. Test the scenarios. What happens if we don't get that grant? Is there another way we can raise that money? How certain are we we're getting the grant? Do we have some stuff which we sort of like colour in a really horrible colour because we're scared about it? That's a good way of drawing your attention to stuff. Okay, the bright green horrible stuff is the stuff that we're worried about. And then test it for scenarios. What happens if you end up with somebody leaving and you've got an empty room for like 6 months? Normally you'll allow for voids. And I know this won't apply to those of you who are in the purchase model, but for those of you who are doing any form of rental, whether it's sort of part equity, part rental, or complete rental, make an allowance for 10% for voids being the housing term for empty room. But what happens if somebody goes over that? Can you withstand that? Does that look okay? What happens if you end up with somebody not paying their rent? How much can you withstand of that? Because actually that's going to impact directly on the way you manage your organisation. If you have payments you're relying upon from people and they don't pay them, how long do you let them go before you say, if you don't pay, we have to say goodbye? And your cash flow forecast should help you identify how much flexibility you've got within that. So it's all very well saying, in practice, my experience of co-ops is like, people go 4 weeks without rent. Oh, well, we'll send them a stiff letter. And then, 8 weeks. Oh, well, we'll start getting really tough. Nothing happens for 4 months. So actually, do your projections allow you to withstand that? Because that might be the dip in your cash flow that puts you into negative cash flow. So just basically look at it and just ask awkward questions of your own co-op or development. What happens if? What are the pinch points? Where does your finance get to nearly zero? Because quite often, you'll see on the thing I passed around, there was a graph. And this is based on the Radical Roots tool. But basically, they borrowed lots of money and they start off with what looks like nothing. It's actually negative, but they borrowed loads of other people's money to get to zero. And it goes up. They got a big balance. They pay some money off. And then they start developing, a balance again. And then they pay money off. But actually, what would happen if some of the payments came earlier than they were expected? What would happen if, your maintenance requirement, something happened and you had to do your maintenance a year earlier than you thought? Is there a risk there? And how would you respond? It's just about, testing it. Yeah, this is a management tool. It's not just about saying, this is how it works, therefore it's going to be okay. This is actually about ongoing. This is not just about the planning stage where you're at now. It's actually about your future. So that was just an example of capital requirements for a shared. Oh, yeah. Profit and loss balance sheets, right. I only flagged those up. That's something you need to know afterwards. But why do they matter? Because actually what you may find is that you think you're doing okay because you've borrowed loads of other people's money. But actually you're not making enough money to cover your expenditure, which means over time you're losing money. Right. I'm not going to talk about income and expenditure. Balance sheet applies if you are borrowing, if you're using community shares, for instance. If you're borrowing lots of other people's money, would you have enough money to pay everyone back if you close tomorrow? Or basically, are you saying, if we find we can no longer manage this housing for whatever reason and we have to close our co-op and sell it off, your money's gone? Or is it a case that actually the value of the assets is far greater than the money we owe out? I mean, that's stuff, that's the complex stuff, right? You don't need to know that now, but I just wanted to flag it up as a kind of, for some of your groups, it depends who you're going to for the money. So, different planning tools, bespoke spreadsheet. You can use your own spreadsheet. Just pull something together, budgets down the side, dates across the top, running balance at the bottom. The Radical Roots model spreadsheet, if you're doing rental only, this is a brilliant tool. If you're going to use loan stock and grants, so you're nodding your head, so bunker, you're using that, right? Brilliant tool. It's been developed, it's an ongoing tool. It's been around for at least 20 years that I know of, and it's being developed all the time. And basically, it's got little fields that you can drop in how much your rents are going to be, where you're getting your money from, how much you're going to pay out in terms of your purchase costs, and it'll do the cash flow for you. How wonderful! Again, make sure you look at it. Don't just accept it as gospel. Actually scrutinise it. It'll produce you a cash flow forecast like the one that I've given you there, which you can print off and you can show that to the bank and go, look, this is how we're going to have the money. Please give us the mortgage. It's fairly straightforward. If you want to use that, you can download it from the Radical Roots website. It's on the publications and resources page. Play with it. Get in, dip your toe in, start playing with it, mess about with it. It really is fairly simple. There are instructions. I see, yeah. Okay, community land trust appraisal tool. If you're doing something that's going to be with multiple tenures, so if we're talking about actually doing a development and then people are either purchasing it or having a leasehold or a mixture of leasehold and shared ownership or shared ownership and social rent, whatever, then this tool here actually enables you to put in the different parameters for how much people are going to pay in terms of rent, in terms of purchase, and that will help generate a cash flow, income and expenditure, and balance sheet. So these are tools, they're designed to be user-friendly. Just read the instructions. Each of them comes with instructions, right? If you read the instructions, they really make sense. If you don't read the instructions, they're an absolute nightmare to understand, right? So, yeah. And the complexity, okay, the last thing that I was supposed to deal with was like the different types of projects and, the complexity, right? So we got all these different types of tenure. So you've got social rents, you've got affordable rents, you've got market rents, it could be like intermediate market rents where it's like not quite as high as market rent, it's a little bit cheaper. Shared equity where people part own and part rent. You could have sale. Yeah, where you're actually selling the property, so people are buying into your development, but there's a covenant on the land, so that when they sell it on, they can't just raise the price ridiculously and price local people out, which is the thinking behind community land trusts. Outright sale, where you do what Leeds Community Homes did. We're going to buy these homes, and we're going to sell those ones off to the highest bidder to make the money to refurb the homes for our members. The greater mix of different things you've got going on, the more complicated. Right, and which means the more complicated the finance is going to be, which means the more complicated your plan is going to be. If you've literally got, the bunker example, great because it's simple, right? You can get away with the Radical Roots spreadsheet because it's cash flow, everything's cash. If you start dealing with borrowing sums of money and having people with part ownership involved, you're probably going to have to go down the route of getting something with a balance sheet to demonstrate that you have the ability to meet your debts. So because it's more complicated, it's going to be a more complicated plan. So there is really no easy answer that for you it's going to be like this, for you it's going to be like, it's literally the complications of your project will lead to the complications in your plan. Don't let that put you off. You've got to get to the bottom of these things to make it work. You can get there, just work your way through it. Yeah, one thing at a time, puzzle it out. And then there's the business about, are you just buying an existing property? Are you converting it? Are you doing self-build where you're buying the land? Are you getting a builder to design and build it for you? Are you getting an off-the-shelf thing where you're just buying a chunk of a development? Are you getting an architect to design it for you? Are you just leasing a property for 15 years? If you've got a number of different types of way that you're accessing the property, again, it's going to be more complicated. And then there's your range of finance. We've spoken about finance. But the other thing to consider as well is the complexity of your plan will be based very much on who you're borrowing from. So for instance, if you're borrowing from the community, if you're doing a community share issue, then you're going to need to write a business plan and a share offer document and run a share issue. That's more complicated than if you're going, here's a loan stock document, it's only 10 pages long, trust us, we're lovely. If you're doing a share offer, it's far more complicated. So actually, the complexity of your finance arrangements is what will lead to the complexity around your plans. And I can't give you any better an answer than that, I'm afraid. And that was like, I'm amazed we got through that. So thank you for bearing with me. As I say, at least one person from each group should have the printout, which has got this link, which is these slides. And like I said, the slides really were there as a kind of, so you got something as a kind of like an aid memoir to help remind you what the important things are.